Hey everybody, welcome to the Village Films podcast. I'm Caleb, and as always, I'm joined by David. Today we're going to be talking about when did bankers, hedge funds, private equity firms, when did these guys that don't know a lot about creative things start making all of the creative decisions in our movies? Bah! This is just my opinion. I'm a filmmaker!
Are you guys videographers?
Who cares?
You know, we're starting to realize why all these movies feel stale. They feel like fast food. We've talked about this in other episodes. And so we started to dive into this a little bit more and basically kind of land on the question of when did, the movie industry as a whole, especially the studio kind of machine that pumps out all the films, when did it start becoming that all these creative decisions, like who greenlights scripts, who makes these selections and casting, and who does this and that, when did those decisions start coming down to guys in high rises, that are running, hedge funds and bankers, and these financial guys are making these creative decisions, and obviously that's not what they do. So now we're seeing the results of this on the screen. So
or when did creatives stop making creative decisions?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what you kind of did the research on this. So what did you find?
Well, yeah, I mean, I went all the way back to like the 1920s, and just some of the notes I have, which I thought was like really interesting, which you got to remember too, like from the 1920s to the 1960s, it wasn't as saturated as the market is now. I mean, now you have so much content out there. But the only way bankers or people that, investors were involved were strictly just from a financial investment standpoint. They didn't have any control over the creative or how things were done or greenlit. They just gave money and then they got a return. And that was like the extent of the relationship in the film industry with the investors. But it's interesting, in the 1970s, you start to see a lot of the great filmmakers that we know today, like Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg. They all had creative control over all their films.
100%
Like,
control.
yeah, 100% control. And that's why the movies were just so great back then, is because they had full control. But there were a couple of movies that did really bad. And I think that's when a lot of the investors started stepping in to kind of mitigate a lot of those losses. And so I think right around the 1970s to 1990s, you start to see more financial control over the creative. Like, people who made more of the financial decisions were starting to, I guess, have more input into the creative, because they were looking at things from a bottom line perspective of, is this movie gonna, is it gonna garner a return? And if it
basically turned into, hey, this has now become almost like a mutual fund, instead of, hey, this is an artistic expression that can have a return. But just because a movie doesn't make 10 times the budget doesn't mean it was a failure. It may not perform financially, but there have been movies that didn't necessarily rake in the money, and they were renowned and become famous. But I think one thing is interesting too, I'm just kind of thinking about this, is they had creative control, and I guess, do you know which ones were the kind of those flops in the 70s and 80s that led to
so
kind of the decline?
they said after a string of financial disasters, and a couple of the movies they mentioned was Heaven's Gate and One from the Heart, which I've never even heard of those, which makes sense. If they were financial disasters, then they probably weren't good. But that's when studios became more risk,
they started getting
aware.
their hands in it more.
Yeah. And that makes sense when you're putting up, millions and millions of dollars back then, even hundreds of millions of dollars back then for a project that size. you're going to want to like, not lose that money. But right around the 90s, it says, a lot of the research points that that's when a lot of like hedge funds and big corporations started investing heavily into the Hollywood film studios. And that's when films were starting to be, more shaped by the people investing versus the actual creatives. And I think we've all been, even as like indie filmmakers are like doing client work, your project tends to be like, you've worked with clients before that are like, hey, just do your thing. I trust you on the creative. Just, just go for it. And then
The
you have
best
other clients
are those.
Yeah. Then you have other clients that just they have a very specific vision, which is fine, but they tend to not be creatives. Like they're, it's like different traits of your personality.
They want to be, but they're not. And so they're trying to do it through you in a weird way,
Yeah.
I guess.
And so you're trying to make the best out of their recommendations, but it just usually ends up like you have like 3 or 4 chefs in the kitchen and you just end up making like a nasty pancake or something.
An entirely different conversation, which is maybe its own podcast, but that makes sense. But something I was thinking too is I wonder if, when these guys started putting their hands in it more, these bankers, the hedge funds, these financial guys, and they had like they started seeing some financial wins, if they were kind of like, oh,
this is easy.
I'm a creative dude, I know what I'm doing. And like that's because I think there's pros and cons to this. The film industry has grown to a multi-billion-dollar industry nationwide, worldwide. In these cities, it's a major labor force. It employs millions of people. So that wouldn't be possible if there wasn't the amount of money that goes into it. So I think it's easy to kind of take the stance of like, oh, they're destroying art. Like they're making these movies bad. And it's like, that is one side of it. But two, I think you do have to think about the side of like how many jobs this provides. And like people are working on these films together. And they're not all bad, just because a movie costs $200 million doesn't mean it's Walmart, But I think there are still directors that demand to have that control, and Christopher Nolan is one of them. And his movies reflect that because he has his vision, and he's not going to let anyone dictate that.
Yeah.
And his movies also perform well for the most part. He's had some that didn't.
Well, that's
$1 billion,
probably that
but
trust between the studio and a renowned director like that is they have the backing to say, hey, I've had control over the creative before, and my movies produce, and they produce well, from a monetary perspective. And so I think that's why studios are able to trust more directors like that, because they have the proven track record. But what else is interesting is like going back to the kind of the time frame of these things starting to develop. Like in the 90s, we had like a lot of great movies in the 90s as well that were being studio lit. A lot of financial decisions were driving the creative still. But I think the difference between then and now is then it was like they were the first of their kind, so it was like they were the first ones to do like the franchise films, and people were like, oh, this is actually really cool. It's kind of like watching an episodic TV show but on the main screen. But after time, they just kept like replicating this formula. And then all of a sudden it was like remake after remake, and like every 10 years now we have another remake of something, because they're like, according to our metrics and our data, this performed well in the past, so it'll perform well now. We have a new generation.
I'm surprised a little bit that there's not more fatigue for that stuff. I think there's a lot of it out there, but then I'll be surprised when like it's like the 4th Ghostbusters reboot I'm seeing, and people are like, I'm so excited for this. I think it's because it'll have like some hot actor that's out right now, and I'm just like,
hot dude.
Yeah, like attractive. But it's like I want the fatigue for this stuff to catch up to the studios, so they'll start to understand that like we want original ideas. You know what I mean? And it's tough.
Yeah, because original ideas are the most risky from a studio greenlit
Yeah.
perspective.
But as we're going to talk in a different episode, there are studios that are not doing this model of let me just churn out 5 sequels of this film. It's all about original ideas. It's about lifting up and coming directors and actors and keeping their budgets small, and their returns are fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'll just give you a little hint. One of the major ones has 2 numbers in their name and a letter at the beginning. A24.
And they've won several Oscars.
So we're going to talk about that in a different episode,
Yeah.
but I think seeing that it's very comforting to know that there are companies that are involved with distribution and production, and they're completely shifting away from this, hey, like I don't need to take $500 million for you and you tell me to make 30 films, and I need to see this investment, and you're gonna make me get these people. And like there's companies saying, hey, we want to make the best art, we want to have original ideas, we want to get people to feel something. And it's reflected, people are enjoying those movies. They cut through the noise.
Well, what's kind of annoying today is like all creative decisions, not all of them, but a lot of them are now based on just data.
Yeah.
And like technology today, like some of the notes I have, like from 2000 to pretty much present, everything is data driven.
Yeah.
And so you have these major corporations, hedge funds, they're all relying just on numbers and algorithms based on audience and reviews and things like that. But it's like, man, creatives, like it's something that's like birthed within. You can't just like put a number to it. And like I think a lot of people are catching on to when you watch Fast and the Furious 12, it's like, I've seen this before.
Magnets. Well, I think it's like you said, it's like birthed within. It's the human element. So like the same thing happens in sports, the metrics like absolutely took over, especially in sports like baseball, but like the statistical and data side of sports has really played a huge part in things. But the thing that you can't factor is that human element, because like you can have all your predictions all you want, but you never know what's going to happen, with a person. And it's the same thing, because we talked about before, how much does it cost to market a film to every person in America?
Yeah.
Like
$50 million on the low end.
That doesn't mean every single person's going to watch it. You don't know if you put your film in front of someone, what they're going to feel, if they're going to watch it at all. It's like, I think the data and the metrics, they're not bad, but they can only get us so far. And this is kind of off this specific topic, but I saw this video about, it kind of plays into this whole thing of like just how far the studios have detached from like what's actually being made and like the quality of it. It was a video about the girl from Stranger Things, Maya Hawke, who plays the ice cream girl.
Oh yeah.
She was talking about how she was having issues with getting casted because they were telling her she doesn't have enough followers. And they were saying things like, we want to cast this person, they've got 1 million followers. So now they're making this creative decision
based on audience.
Yeah, based on like someone's influential audience reach, which I guess I understand from a marketing perspective, but man, there were a lot of great actors that were discovered before social media even existed. So it's like, you have no idea that there may be that actor out there that like is the next, Meryl Streep, and you didn't cast her because she only had 200,000 followers instead of 3 million.
Well, it goes back to making decisions based on money.
Yeah.
Because if you have an actor that has 30 million followers on social media, that means you can probably cut your costs of marketing down like 20%.
Yeah.
And so everything comes back to the numbers.
Well, it's like you're not giving the best person the chance.
Yeah. Well,
acting,
Yeah, I mean, if the number one goal when you're making the movie is to make a profit, you're not going to make decisions.
Well, I mean, that's the crux of the conversation. You shouldn't. Yeah. The intention with the movie the number one thing I mean, I guess it's impossible, but your main focus cannot be to just make a return on your investment, because it's going to negatively affect every creative decision you make.
Yeah.
You can have a goal to do that, but like,
well, you should, because if you don't make profits, you're not going to make any more movies.
That's
you
true.
have to make money to make more movies, and that's just
I
the
think
game.
it's just balancing that goal. Well, I saw a thing where they're casting, or they were considering casting. What movie was it? Oh my gosh, I don't remember. It was some major movie. Maybe it was like obviously they're rebooting Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh dang!
And I think they were considering casting for that evil queen lady. They were considering casting like
Witch.
Charlie XI, the pop star. She's a singer. And I was like, I know it's because she probably has 100 million followers. It's
Well, and that means they're going to make it into a musical.
no, they're not.
Dude. Oh, man, that would suck. Yeah. Well, so some numbers we'll put them on the screen, but
From the olden.
yeah, so like I did some comparisons of movies that were done like in the, late 40s and to present. And, we adjusted the budget based on inflation, so what it would be, in today's terms. But like Gone with the Wind, it's probably not a great example because it's like the highest grossing film of all time by far.
So insane.
It was made in 1939. Its original budget in today's money to talk is $85 million. Back then it was $3.9 million. But its original box office gross was $390 million, and in today that would be $8.5 billion.
That just does not make any sense. That's
So
insane.
an $85 million budget produced an $8.5 billion return. Now there are other factors, like Gone with the Wind was produced in a time where it's like it wasn't
There
heavily
was like
saturated.
one movie in the theater for 8 months.
But I mean, a lot of the old movies that were, most likely based and created off of the director's creative vision did really, really well.
Yeah.
And there are movies that, were studio lit that did really well too. But yeah, a lot of these on here are major studio produced, but they are like, the directors were trusted to make a lot of the creative decisions. Like Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg, he had control over that. Titanic, James Cameron, he had control over that. Avatar, James Cameron had control over that. So yeah,
I mean, it's, even now, like there are still instances where a lot of money is put into a movie and a lot of the creative decisions are made by these financial guys. But the director is still given tasks, to tell their story, and they still do well. So it's not like every movie is like in the red 100 million because these guys don't know what they're doing. It goes back to the thing that Glenn told us. They'll greenlight 15 projects in hopes that one can pay for the losses of the other one. So they're going into it knowing they're going to have losses, but they're trying to just catch lightning. And I'm just like, well, maybe if you just hone it in a little bit, just spend a little more time, like let these directors speak a little bit more, like let their creative voice shine through. But
well, dude, I think a perfect example of like when the studio starts to interfere with the director's creative vision is Zack Snyder and the Justice League fiasco. Like, there's a reason why Zack Snyder has a director's cut. And then there's a reason why midway through making the film, they brought on another director who I think was the same director that directed the first Avengers film for Marvel, because they wanted it to be more Marvel-y.
yeah, but the whole DC universe conversation
Is a
is
disaster too.
even with his cut, it still is not wonderful. Like they freaking dropped the ball. They drop the ball every 5 years. They're wondering why
well,
they
now
can't.
they have James Gunn, so we'll see.
Don't let us down. Speaking of that,
starting over.
Superman trailer. What did you think of that?
I
You
don't
hated
know.
it.
I've seen
I
so
thought it
many
was so
Supermans,
good, dude.
I
I thought it was so good. I think it's gonna have a more emotional tone.
Henry, dude, I just love
Henry
Henry
Cavill.
Cavill's Superman character. And his God, dude.
Every episode is you confessing your love to some actor. Oh, I love Timothy Chalamet. Yeah, Henry Cavill was a great Superman, and they just wasted it. It's so sad.
Yeah.
All right,
I don't think so.
so I think that's all we got for this. That's probably enough yapping. I think we've gone for 24 minutes.
Join us next time for the next yapping
Yeah.
sesh.
So if you enjoyed our conversation, or if you have something that you want to add to it, or if we had all of our figures incorrect and we look like idiots, I know that there's smarter people out there that know way more about this, but hey, you don't have a camera and a microphone, so we're the experts. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think, like this video and share it, and we'll see you guys in the next one.